Some mysteries were never meant to be solved. Some crimes left no clues. And some people vanished forever. Welcome to Mystery Ledger, where real mysteries are uncovered. February 28, 2026, a sudden wave of missile and airstrikes rocks Tehran. Within hours, reports emerged that Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, has been killed. A dramatic escalation in Middle East conflict that the world never saw coming. The strike was surgical, executed with a level of precision that points to a state-level actor. As the smoke cleared, the streets fell into a haunting silence. The heart of the Islamic Republic had stopped beating. In Washington, the silence was just as loud. No claims of responsibility, no official denials, just a growing shadow. To understand the impact of this void, we have to look back at the man who held the strings for nearly 40 years. Khamenei had been Iran's supreme leader since 1989, wielding ultimate authority over its government, military, judiciary, and foreign policy. For nearly 4 decades, a rule defined by stability and a refusal to bend to the West. His journey began in the fire of the 1979 revolution, a pivotal moment that reshaped the Middle East forever. In those early leadership years, he consolidated power, building a network of loyalty that would prove unbreakable. His military parades weren't just for show, they were a message of defiance to a world that watched with concern. Elections were held, but the ultimate decision-making remained within his inner circle, ensuring a consistent ideological path. His public appearances were rare, each one carefully staged to project an image of unwavering strength. But strength has a shelf life. And in the early hours of February 28th, the shelf broke. Who stood to gain from the rubble? For years, the Middle East had been a tinderbox. Iran, the United States, and Israel, locked in a shadow war that refused to stay in the shadows. From the ruins of Aleppo to the mountains of Yemen, the proxies fought the battles their masters wouldn't. Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, each a front in a struggle for dominance. In the Persian Gulf, the rhetoric was backed by hardware. Naval standoffs and coastal missile batteries became the new normal, but the heart of the friction lay in the atom. Nuclear enrichment facilities like Natanz and Fordow became the focus of global anxiety and covert sabotage. Sanctions squeezed the Iranian economy, a maximum pressure campaign that left the streets of Tehran simmering with domestic unrest. The internal pressure was building, a government fighting a war abroad while trying to keep the lid on a boiling pot at home. Assassinations and cyber attacks became the new weapons. A silent escalation that signaled the old rules of engagement were long gone. In the digital realm, the strikes were constant, sophisticated code designed to cripple infrastructure and reveal the most guarded secrets. The map was a patchwork of red zones, one miscalculation, one stray drone, and the whole region was ready to ignite. By the winter of 2026, the diplomatic channels were dry. Tehran was a city on the edge, and the world was about to find out what happens when the edge gives way. In the early hours of February 28th, US and Israeli forces launched Operation Epic Fury. It was a coordinated campaign of strikes across multiple Iranian targets, designed to cripple command and control. Coordinated from the Mediterranean to the Persian Gulf, the operation was a display of unparalleled joint capability. Stealth assets were deployed to bypass modern air defense systems, operating in the blind spots of the Republic. Radar screens across the region lit up, a swarm of precision munitions, invisible until it was too late. Central Tehran became the focal point. The sky over the capital was about to change forever. One of the key targets was Khamenei's leadership compound in central Tehran, a fortress within a city now marked for deletion. The precision was absolute. Using intelligence gathered over decades, the strikes were designed to minimize collateral and maximize impact. At 03:14 local time, the first payloads reached their marks. The sound was felt before it was heard. The timeline was tight. 3 waves of coordinated strikes over a 90-minute window, leaving the defense network in disarray. In Washington and Tel Aviv, commanders watched the feeds in silence. The dice had been thrown. The world was different now. Operation Epic Fury wasn't just a military action, it was a geopolitical statement written in fire. The smoke from the compound signaled the end of an era. The supreme leader's shadow was finally lifting from the nation. The strikes were over, but the fallout was just beginning. The world held its breath as the silence returned to the streets of Tehran. Israeli officials reported that Khamenei was inside his compound at the time of the strike. The strike was precise, burying the ultimate authority of the Republic under tons of concrete and steel. Intelligence sources later confirmed the news. His body was recovered from the heart of the wreckage. Satellite analysis showed total structural collapse. the surgical nature of epic fury had achieved its primary objective. As the sun rose over Tehran, the shockwaves reached every corner of the globe. The geopolitical map had shifted in a single night. In Washington, the confirmation wasn't just official, it was personal, a statement that would define a presidency. US President Donald Trump publicly confirmed the news, marking the end of a 4-decade standoff. He called Khamenei one of the most evil people in history, a stark assessment of the man who had long defied the West. The administration stated the operation was a defensive necessity aimed at protecting American interests across the region. It was a message to allies and enemies alike. The red lines had been redrawn in fire. But in the smoke of Tehran, a new question emerged. What happens to a nation when its head is severed? The strikes were the easy part. The real mystery is the vacuum they left behind, a void that the whole world was now rushing to fill. The confirmation was the spark. What followed was a global firestorm that threatened to consume every boundary ever drawn. Tehran fell into a state of collective grief. State media announced a 40-day mourning period, a silence that echoed through every street. From the government buildings in Tehran to the UN headquarters in New York, the flags were lowered, a sign of respect for some, a signal of dread for others. An emergency session of the Security Council was called. The air was thick with accusations and the looming threat of a much larger conflict. In every Allied capital, the reaction was the same, a mix of validation and the stark realization that the endgame had arrived. The silence didn't last long. The response was written in the sky. Tehran was down, but its reach was still long. Retaliatory missile and drone strikes followed, launching from hidden silos and mobile batteries across the Iranian heartland. A swarm of autonomous assets targets US and Allied positions, testing the limits of regional defense. US and Allied air defenses lit up the night, a violent ballet of fire and steel over the Persian Gulf. In cities like Dubai and Riyadh, the sirens were a haunting reminder. No one was safe in the new reality. Evacuations began in the dark. The tactical map was glowing red. Every strike, every counterstrike, brought the region closer to the edge of total war. The world watched, paralyzed by the fear that this was only the beginning of a war without an end. Epic fury achieved its target. The strikes on Tehran were answered not with words, but with iron. The response was coordinated, clinical, and fierce. Iran's government, the Revolutionary Guards, and their regional allies initiated a multi-front counteroffensive. From deep within the command centers of the IRGC, the order was given. The shadow war was now a hot conflict. Waves of ballistic missiles were launched toward US bases and strategic sites across the region, signaling a backlash that many had feared but few were truly prepared for. The sky was filled with precision steel. At bases from Iraq to Kuwait, the alarms were constant. Personnel moved to hardened shelters as the first impacts were recorded. Allied air defenses lit up the night. A violent, high-stakes game of cat and mouse played out in the upper atmosphere. On monitoring screens across the globe, the world watched the escalating tally of hits and intercepts. Despite the defenses, the volume of the response ensured that some payloads reached their mark. The damage was both physical and symbolic. The sirens were a haunting chorus, echoing through cities that had once been the pillars of regional stability. Global headlines shifted from the death of a leader to the possibility of a total regional war. The stakes had never been higher. Action and reaction, the oldest law in the book. But in this game, the price of the next move might be more than the world can afford to pay. The regional balance had been shattered. Now, everyone was operating in the blind, waiting for the smoke to clear. The death of Ayatollah Khamenei marks a historic turning point. For the first time in nearly 4 decades, the seat of ultimate power is empty. Eliminating the longest-serving leader of the Islamic Republic has created a void that no one was truly prepared to fill. The institutions he built are still standing, but the soul of the government is in a state of suspended animation. On the streets, the silence is brittle. A city waiting for a signal, for a name, for a future that is still being debated in the dark. Leadership succession is now at the forefront. A high-stakes game played between family loyalty and military necessity. Constitutional uncertainty looms. The laws are written on paper, but power is being written in the shadows of the assembly of experts. The question isn't just who is next, it's what kind of Iran they will lead. A nation of the clergy or a nation of the guard? Beyond the borders, regional power recalibration has begun. Every player in the Middle East is recalculating their next move. From Riyadh to Tel Aviv, the intelligence feeds are constant. A vacuum this large doesn't stay empty for long. The era of the supreme leader is over. but the legacy of his defiance will haunt the region for decades to come. The borders may remain the same, but the reality on the ground has been fundamentally altered. The ledger has been turned. The world watches and waits. One chapter ends, and a more dangerous one begins. From Tehran's corridors of power to global capitals, the killing of the supreme leader reshapes geopolitics. The echoes of the strike are still vibrating through the halls of the Republic, where once solid foundations are now shifting sand. The full consequences will unfold in years to come, in diplomacy, warfare, and the balance of power across the Middle East. New alliances are being forged in the dark, while old ones are tested by the sudden vacuum of authority. Warfare has found a new rhythm. Operation Epic Fury was just the first movement in a symphony of high-stakes escalation. The city waits, the nation waits. The world watches the smoke and wonders what the morning will bring. Some mysteries are solved, and some are forgotten, and some are still waiting. You're watching Mystery Ledger. Make sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. See you in the next investigation.